Daniel chapter 2, verses 1 through 49. A lot of text for us today. Here we go. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, "I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means." The astrologers answered the king, "May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it." Up until verse 4, this is... Oh, let me use a different color. I apologize. It's not erasing very well. 1 second here. Okay. Let me use a different color. Up until verse 4, this is a normal day. It was very common in this time for kings to have dreams. It still is this way today in the Middle East. They assume that God will speak to them through dreams. So Nebuchadnezzar's had a dream, and it's troubled him, and he can't sleep. So he summons the people whose job is to interpret dreams: the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the astrologers. Now, all of these are not the same. Some of them are very much into the spiritual, witchcraft, even maybe necromancy, potentially in some of these words. But the astrologers are more of the scientific observers. They're tracking the movement of stars. They're trying to figure out what they mean. All of it is heresy. All of it's wrong. But they're not all the same sorts of people. And what they would do is use these books to hear about the symbol in a dream. The books would tell them what those symbols have meant in the past or other times, and then they would use that to kind of predict what they think the dream meant for the future. It was a very scientific process, really, for dream interpretation, as scientific as that can be. So Nebuchadnezzar says, "Come in and tell you my dream." King to tell him what he had dreamed. And now this is where it starts to get weird. He didn't ask to say, like, tell me what my dream meant. Tell me what I had dreamed. He said, "I have a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means." They get that. This is normal. That's normal. This intent is strange. The astrologers answer the king, "May the king live forever." Standard greeting. "Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it." This is how it always goes. You tell us the dream, and we'll interpret it. What's different is that he wants the astrologers to tell him what he dreamed. So we'll go back to our other side now, and we'll start off here, verses 1 through 4. Bad dream needs interpretation. Right, and for a Babylonian, this is a pretty standard fare. This is why these guys exist. The king replies to the astrologers, "This is what I have firmly decided." Now, when the king says this, to preface what they're saying this, there's no discussion here. There's no wiggle room. This is how it is. "If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I then," this is an if-then statement, if, and then so here's our then I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. Literally, the house gets destroyed and the city would put their trash there. This was actually a fairly common practice. But so we have two ifs, we have two if-thens. "If you tell me the dream and explain it," here's the second one, "then you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honors. So, tell me the dream and interpret it for me." If you are one of the astrologers, you're beginning to sweat because they don't know what the dream is. How are they supposed to interpret it if they don't have the dream? So, just in case, once more they replied, "Let the king tell his servants the dreams, and we will interpret it." So let's go back to our story. This is verses 5 and 6. Verses 5 through 6. Up here, king won't tell the dream, and then rewards or death are the options. Once more they replied, tell the servants the dream, and we will interpret it. Verse 8. Then the king answered, I am certain that you are trying to gain time because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. And then he says something really interesting. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream and I will know that you can interpret it for me. So there's two things to be recognizing here. One is that he wants to know that the interpretation is true. So the interpretation must be true. And he thinks as a test to know whether or not the interpretation is true, you must also tell me the dream. That's that part. But here's the second thing is, I guess we'll just use the word villains. Villains must be gotten rid of. He says, you have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things. What's important to remember is that if we go back up to the top, Nebuchadnezzar is in his second year of his reign. Plus the inaugural year, this would mean 3 years as king, which is the exact amount of time that Daniel and his friends have been in school. So Daniel and his friends have just recently finished up their schooling. Nebuchadnezzar's still in his early time as king, and he's thinking, you know, these guys, I don't feel like they've really got my back. I'm the new young king, and I really feel like my wise men are trying to take advantage of me. So if they can't tell me the actual truth, I'll just kill them all. No big deal. So verses 8 through 9, we'll go back now. And we kind of understand why this is all going on, verses 7 through 9. We'll go down here. We'll call them counselors as a whole. Counselors are potentially corrupt, and king is okay with all of them dying. So that's scary. When the king is okay with this whole group of people dying, that's bad news for that group of people. So let's go back to the text. The astrologers answered the king. You know, they're really swinging for the fences here in this reply. There is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. Now, we have to appreciate that Daniel is writing this, or maybe it's an oral tradition that's been handed down to somebody else, but let's assume that Daniel's writing this, that there's no one on earth who can do what the king asks. This is what's so cool about this, is that this phrase is being said not so much for the king and these guys, but really for the Israelite who is hearing this story, because we would immediately think of Joseph. And this next line makes it even better. No king, however, great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or astrologer, right? And so now you're really thinking of Joseph here. It's not by accident. Joseph is in Egypt, right? He's also kind of in exile, if you will. And so there's these stories that come out of exile where the people of God are put in impossible situations, but God brings them through. And that's immediately what we should be thinking of. What the king asks is too difficult. And here's the second thing that he says right here. No one can reveal to the king except the gods, and they do not live among the humans. We're going to go ahead and highlight that. Let me find a good... Oh, I don't have a highlighter. Okay, so let me do this. We'll just circle that in yellow. And every time that we see something like this, we'll continue to pull it up. The gods, they have to be able to reveal this to the king. And the problem is that we don't have access to the gods. They do not live among the humans. And the astrologers, right, they're the scientists of their day. They're like, hey, I get that the gods are real, but we can't access them. We can't understand them. They don't talk to us. That's why we use these books to understand what they're giving us. What the king asks is too difficult. And there's a whole worldview at work here in verses 10 and 11 that God is going to use Daniel to utterly flip on its head. So verses 10 through 11. Verses 10 through 11. The wise men sow foolish words. And really there, when we're thinking about the wise men sowing foolish words, they're speaking against God, even though they don't really realize that they're doing it yet. All right. This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men in Babylon. So the decree was issued and to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. So Daniel and his friends are the newest class into this, newest graduates into this order, if you will, of wise men. And the first thing that happens once they get put into this group of wise men is that they are ordered to be killed. This is a very bad day for Daniel and his friends. Verses 12 through 13. Daniel and friends go from excellent interview to death row. Remember in the last chapter, chapter 1, that Nebuchadnezzar had personally interviewed them and said they were more excellent than anybody else he talked to. But then, within weeks or months of that, he's ordered their execution, because he's ordered the execution of all the wise men. All right, our story continues. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, so now Arioch's going out and he's rounding up the boys, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. And that's really important here. For the exile, remember that Jesus tells us to be wise as snakes, but innocent as doves. You got to be crafty. You got to be wise. So imagine the king's guard shows up. And he says, hey, Daniel, hey, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, you guys all have to die. So Daniel says to the officer, how dare you? No. He gently, wisely, tactfully asks one question. Why did the king issue such a harsh decree? And because he acts with wisdom and tact, he gets an answer. Arioch explained the matter to Daniel. He gets the whole story. At this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time. So Daniel appeals to the king directly, asking for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Now, remember when these guys up here asked to tell me the dream, and the king said, I am certain that you are trying to gain time. I think what Daniel's doing is just being honest. He's saying, hey, can I have actual time so that I can interpret the dream for you? And I think that the honesty and the wisdom and the tact here is what gets Daniel what he desires. And so let's go 14 through 16. And here we go, 14 through 16. Wisdom and tact help greatly. And Daniel gets to go home and spend more time praying. Daniel returns to the house and explains the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven. So God is in heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So Daniel and his friends don't want to die, so they're pleading to God for mercy concerning the mystery. And during the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and season. He deposes his... Sorry, let me come back. I'm going to stop right here at verse 19. Let's go back. So 17 through 19. Oopsie. There we go. Right here, verses 17 through 19. I'm gonna put this out here. Let me back it up a little bit. So it's real close. This is like sometimes the peak climax. This whole range here. This is kind of on this side. This is 17 through 19 on this side of the parentheses. So let me move up, and we'll go all the way over here. What's happening is Daniel and friends pray to God for mercy. They know God is in heaven, but they also know that God is down here, that he hears his people, he acts down here, he cares for us, and he reveals mysteries. Which means that Daniel and his friends believe that God has in some way given Nebuchadnezzar a mystery, a vision, and that God knows the interpretation, and that if God wants to, God will tell Daniel and his friends what all of that meant. There's a ton of faith in their prayers. There's also a beautiful picture of, and I'll go up for this, communion or fellowship. He's not praying alone. The four of them get together to pray. And by the way, these aren't old men. These guys are like 18 years old, give or take a couple years. Probably a couple younger or a couple older than that, but they're all in this age range. These are young men getting together to pray. And you just got to love that. It reminds us how important Christian community is. And then in the verses that follow, 20 through 23, we see just God glorified for his mighty deeds. And that's this whole section, right? Is the climax, and it's the worship, and it's all of those beautiful things in this lesson. All right, let's come back to the text. This is just, by the way, a psalm worth studying and searching through. Now, we don't have time to really unpack it all today, but I just encourage you to read this regularly. Then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, "Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him." And I think that's really the end, if you will, of our first little saga here. So I went the wrong way again. I apologize. So here, now towards the bottom, verse 24. Daniel, and I hope you saw this, Daniel intercedes for the wise men. The role of Daniel in exile is he's taking on this role of intercessor for the wise men. So he goes to Arioch and says, "Don't kill them all. I've got it figured out. Let's go." And actually, he doesn't say, "I've got anything figured out." He just says, "Take me to the king and I'll interpret the dream for him." And we'll see why I made that correction here in a little bit. Verse 25, Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, look at what Arioch does here. "I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means." Arioch found no one, right? Daniel was the one who went to the king to ask for time. Daniel was the one who asked. Arioch is trying to steal credit for how cool Daniel is. And that's worth noting. So let's go back over here. Kind of how the new story starts out. Verse 25, Arioch trying to get credit. And then Daniel basically just steals his thunder. The king asked Daniel, also Belteshazzar, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" Daniel replies, "Nope." "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he is asked about." No. But, here we go. There is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. And that, we're going to go with the yellow. Remember when they said, "The gods are up there. They're not down here." Daniel's like, "Yeah, they are up there." Well, not they. He is up there. And he talks to us down here. He reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar. Notice he doesn't say, "He has shown me." He says, "He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the days to come." Daniel's saying, this vision, it ain't for me. It's for you, man. God had a message for you. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in bed are these. As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come. So Nebuchadnezzar is in bed, and he begins to think about the future. He's been king for 3 years. He's like, what is my kingdom going to become? What's the future look like? And the revealer of mysteries, right, the God in heaven, showed you what is going to happen. Now, notice that the Babylonians always said gods, plural, but not Daniel. Daniel says the God, right, in heaven, the one God. As for me, Like, what's Daniel's part in this? Because so far he said nobody could know. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me not because I have greater wisdom, not because of anything in me, or than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty may know the interpretation, and you may understand what went through your mind. This ain't about me, your majesty. This is a conversation between you and God, right? This is not about me. This is a conversation between you and God. I just get to have a small part in it. So I'm going to go, here we go, 27, because I just love this so much. Verses 26 and 27. Daniel gives Arioch a heart attack. And then let's go back. And then in verses 28 through 30, down here, Daniel, let me move this. I'm going to move this pretty far away so that we have some space. Daniel gives all glory to God. All right, back to our text. Here's the vision. Your majesty looked, and before you there stood a large statue, enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. So there's 5 tiers to the statue. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. This is a rock of heaven. The statue is made of, humans made that, but not this rock. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron and the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces, became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth, right? And so, obviously we should be thinking eschatologically. We're talking about Mount Zion. We're talking about Hebrews chapter 12. We're talking about everything's going to be removed and the kingdom of heaven is what's going to remain. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king, your majesty. You are the King of Kings. That's how Nebuchadnezzar is called, the King of Kings. And the God of heaven has given you dominion, power, might, and glory. How can Daniel serve Nebuchadnezzar? Because Daniel knows that God is the one behind his dominion, power, might, and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind, all beasts of the field, and birds of the sky. Where they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. So gold is Nebuchadnezzar. After you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. So the God of heaven sets up a kingdom. This would then be the kingdom of heaven. Nor will it be left to another people. So no one's going to inherit this. This is permanently and forever the kingdom of heaven. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it itself will endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, but not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. His dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. Daniel's just put himself in a dangerous position. Perhaps Nebuchadnezzar, it's the VeggieTales name for him, was afraid of being destroyed. He saw the statue get destroyed. He thought, maybe that's me. Daniel's just told him, no, it's not you who's going to be destroyed. It's all the kingdoms of the earth, because the God of heaven is going to set up his own kingdom. Daniel's just told Nebuchadnezzar that the God of heaven gave him his throne, and the God of heaven one day is going to destroy it and set up his own kingdom. That's a big deal. And a dangerous thing to say to a king, but I think Nebuchadnezzar's happy because he's realizing, okay, my kingdom is personally safe. And we'll see his response at the end of this. So let me get to verses. Okay, so verse 31 through 35. Verses 31 through 35. Daniel presents the dream. And then verses 36 through 45, I think that's right. All the way down to 45, yep. Daniel interprets dream. Now, I've just kind of given the actual summary, but let's not forget the point of all this is that God is sovereign over all his creation. It's not just the God of Israel. The God of Israel is also the God of Babylon. Daniel's making a bold claim for people who are paying money to Babylon, right? God is sovereign over all his creation, including you, Nebuchadnezzar. How will Nebuchadnezzar react? If you can feel the rising tension, that's what you should feel here is how will he respond, right? And his response is the highlight then of this text. Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel, paid him honor, and ordered that offering and incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you are able to reveal this mystery. God of gods. So Nebuchadnezzar just put God, Yahweh, God of Israel, over the Babylonian gods. Daniel said that God called Nebuchadnezzar the King of Kings. So the king calls God the Lord of Kings. Daniel's called God the revealer of mysteries. The king says, yes, he is the revealer of mysteries, for you are able to reveal this mystery. When you see this here, the worship, it seems like he might be worshiping Daniel, falling prostrate before him, honor and incense. But I think it's that he's paying homage to God through Daniel because of the praise that he lavishes on God. So 46 and 47 are really the high point, I think, of this, verses 46 through 47. And here's the high point. God is revealing himself to Nebuchadnezzar when his own kings reject him. And Nebuchadnezzar worships God. So super cool moment. We see that this is very much about Nebuchadnezzar and God, not so much about Daniel. And let's go back to the text for the final couple verses, verses 48 through 49. The king placed Daniel in a high position, lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon. Babylon was where the king spent half of his time. He had a different city for the other half of the year. Placed him in charge of all of his wise men. These are the wise men that Daniel just saved. Now, when the 18-year-old becomes boss of the wise men, that's usually not a good thing. The wise men would hate him, except that Daniel has just saved all their lives. And so God elevates Daniel to this position, and he even gives Daniel the credibility he needs to rule over these men well. Moreover, at Daniel's request, Daniel's like, well, now that I'm in this position, can I get something out of this? Yes, Daniel, what do you want? Daniel's like, I want a mansion. I want a Lamborghini. I want it. No, he says, can I get Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as administrators over the province of Babylon? How about that? And he gets his friends, those other four impressive boys that the king probably is beginning to remember now, He gets them as administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remains in the royal court. So Daniel follows Nebuchadnezzar around wherever Nebuchadnezzar goes, and his three friends stay in Babylon as administrators over that. And so let's go back to the timeline of this thing here. So in the falling action, verses 48 through 49, God blesses all four exiles in Babylon. Remember that as we follow God in Babylon, we will deal with the strange tension of being elevated, but at the same time, people are going to want to kill us. So we get elevated by God, but we'll get pressure from the world. And this is the difficult life of an exile in Babylon. And frankly, I'm excited about it. I love it, and I love to see Christians who are being faithful to their God elevated to the highest positions, and then the world hate them for it. Because what that does every single time is it reminds this world that Christians are different, that God is with us. And so be faithful to God. Bring glory to him in your time in exile.